Truth. Live. Faith is resistance.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live, number 433. Or 34. Which is it, Summer?
I believe it's 33. 33, I think.
Well, it's one of those.
34, 32, 33.
Well, for decades, Americans have been told that globalism was inevitable, that national borders, cultural distinctions, and sovereign decision-making had to be sacrificed for the sake of global stability. It's been this way since the end of World War II for sure. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, that's when the liberal international order really took hold. And, you know, you tell me, Summer, from my experience, you know, Soviet Union fell when I was just starting college, but even before then, but especially since then, it always seemed like the assumption was globalism. The assumption was we're going to be entangled with these nations, and the United Nations is going to be making decisions for us on what we should do. I know what. You know, and for folks out there listening, think about that for a little bit. What were your assumptions? You know, especially those of you who are Generation X.
Well, when I grew up, I was actually, it was something that was always sprinkled throughout movies. That, you know, one day in the distant future, there would be, you know, the United Nations would be running everything. And so it was a distant idea for me that, you know, like one day they would be sort of running the show, and that would allude to a centralization of power. However, you know, we hadn't gotten to that place yet. I think there was still very much a illusion of everybody was in their own nation state doing their own thing. I think that they worked hard to make it appear that way, even though behind the scenes we know that George H.W. Bush, basically, I believe it was in 1990, said that the American people are now going to pledge their allegiance to the UN Charter. So he was pledging that for us behind the scenes, and we saw glimpses here and there and speeches and such. But not really, you know, it was sort of still conspiratorial. Like if you were to notice those things, you would be called a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, we were promised peace. That was the promise through integration throughout the world. Prosperity if we were to be interdependent on the United Nations. That's what H.W. Bush was famous for saying, too. He loved the United Nations. And that was his idea of a new world order. It was that liberal international order. Moral progress, you know, through transnational governance, through multilateral governance. What we received instead was endless war. That's what the United Nations was founded for, you know, for peace.
Yeah, it literally, what the quote that we've often shared is, quote, "It is the sacred principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter to which the American people will henceforth pledge their allegiance." And this was George H.W. Bush in an address to the United Nations in 1990.
Yeah, and the economic system was rigged. It's been rigged in favor of those who write the rules, but never for those who live under them. That's the point of the international rules-based order.
Right. It was meant to, since the Council of Foreign Relations in the late 70s, you know, the plan was degrowth, what we now know as degrowth. The Club of Rome is involved in this, the Davos, it's the Great Reset. It's this idea that because capitalism has maxed out, that, you know, we would go from abundance to scarcity. You know, the new chic and the new luxury was, you know, going more bare bones, you know, trying to socially condition people into the fact that they're going to move us into austerity and a neo-slave class, instead of, you know, the individual being able to have you know, liberty and liberty of conscience and not be controlled, in other words.
Yeah, that's the case. I fell out of the shot there. All right. Well, today we're examining what may be the most serious challenge to that globalist framework yet. Particularly the emergence of a radically different vision that's embedded in the latest national security strategy from the current administration, the Trump administration. And there was also, right after that, an idea, a set of principles and proposals that were leaked. So it could be real. It could have been an early part of the national security strategy. The national security strategy, it's titled the National Security Strategy for the United States of America. Do I have a copy up here? No, I've got the Monroe Doctrine there. Well, anyway, so the national...
Well, it's certainly located in one of our articles, the one that's called The Nation State. You can get it there.
Yeah, we've got it there.
We also had that published in Liberty Sentinel this week, so that's exciting.
Yeah, let the people know about our partnership with Liberty Sentinel.
just that we're going to be on with Alex. We've got 2 more shows scheduled with him coming up, and we'll also have some of our articles featured coming up as well, like 2 more and plus a mailer. So we really love Alex Newman. He's been incredibly supportive. We've sort of gotten to know him just digitally, not like personally, but, through the last year or so, I would say. And it's basically culminated into him, like saying, hey, we think he says, he thinks we're doing good work, and he wants to be supportive. So we're really, really grateful for that. And it's amazing, particularly because we've had such a time, like finding people that we can be truly partnered with. So it's a true blessing, and we're excited about it.
Yeah. So you can find an interview that I did with Alex Newman on Liberty Sentinel on Rumble, YouTube. I think they were on satellite television channel.
Yeah.
And Summer's writing is now on their website as well.
LibertySentinel.org.
We're excited about that. So please check that out. Now, the Core 5 Alliance may or may not have been part of the national security strategy. So
it was in the early draft, one of the early drafts.
Possibly, yeah.
It was. It was.
Well,
the Core 5 Alliance was mentioned in an early draft, but it didn't make it to the final cut.
Okay. So what is it? The national security strategy is basically what an administration lays out its foreign policy positions sometime within the first year of that administration, and that's what that was released on with no fanfare. I think on the last day of November. And it states what our strategy will be and how we think of and deal and interact with other nations. What's fascinating about this particular national security strategy from the Trump administration is that foreign policy is now focused on the American citizen, the middle class, national sovereignty, decoupling from multilateral organizations and treaties. So we put out a short video, a 10-minute video about that on the channel. You can find that there in one of our shorter videos, not the live videos, but the videos. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I want to this Core 5. You've seen recently the what's this peace thing called?
The Board of Peace.
The Board of Peace, which was an interesting meeting. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this. We have noticed that among our own peers, podcasters, writers, those of us who are Christians, conservatives, and people who have been involved in exposing the truth for a long time are very, very hesitant to take it seriously, to see anything good in the current administration. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that Summer is very suspicious of these, of leadership. I mean, I'm talking about at the federal level, United Nations, which we should all be. The reason I'm saying that is because we have not come to our position now because we are on the Trump train or because we're sycophants for Donald Trump. We've come to this conclusion because of the information, the actual policy, and that's not all. Then the follow-through with the policy.
Well, it also
decoupling from UNESCO,
right,
and the World Health Organization.
Yeah, the 66 organizations that
Right.
are affiliated in therein.
Not
with
pulling
United
out of
Nations.
not pulling out of the United Nations though, because we were one of the founding nations of it, and it's probably better
Yeah.
to remain connected to it in some way.
Yeah, I mean, there's
I
people
think they want to reform it. I don't know that that's possible, but I think that's what they're thinking.
well, yeah, there's a lot of people that we trust and respect that believe that we need to fully exit from the United Nations. But the thing is like, I think it's actually prudent to keep your seat at the table there so that you can influence things. And because the United States has been the number one donor of the whole thing, yeah, it does actually make sense, like logistically, that you'd want to stay in the organization and then actually be able to impact, like changing it, like taking all of their connections and all of their networking and then, firing people, like just get rid of the bad seeds so that they can't continue to go over there and operate within that corrupted system. I mean, the Trump administration has said over and over again that it's corrupt, that it's full of criminals, it's full of people that are participating in fraudulent activity. It does make sense. Like, I think people have to be more flexible with their thinking. Like, just because your subconscious has been pre-programmed to assume that you're going to know how everything is going to progress. When you see this, it means that. When you see this, it means that. Well, I think we actually all have to take a step back and say, hang on, different stuff is happening now. The administration is decidedly talking about, within the national security strategy. You're going to hear us talk about that tonight in great depth and explain to you why this is something that, like, biblically is very positive. It's something that God could bless. And then there's actions that are actually being taken, and they're talking about Hamiltonian economics, the American system. This is something that all of these presidents in our past, whenever they were on board with the American system, the Hamiltonian system, those presidents were, poo-pooed, right? Bang-banged. They were taken out of the game because why? Because the Crown, the City of London, the Anglo-Dutch establishment has never actually lost control. We saw that in Disney when there was a lot of momentum with Governor DeSantis, who wanted to basically shut Disney down for all of the stuff that they were doing with just the perversion with the kids and the wokeness and all that. And you know what? He couldn't get that done. The governor of Florida wanted to shut it down. He couldn't get it done. Why? Because the Crown, because the transnational corporations, they prevented that from happening. So we know also in Columbia University, it's like the incubator for technocracy and DEI and Edward Said and Frantz Fanon and all of these woke masters that have been infiltrating our higher institutions into Fabian socialism. Like, a lot of these Fabians have, like the handler for Mondami up in New York City is somebody who's none other than groomed from the London School of Economics. This is a Fabian woman. The Fabians have installed Mandami, and there is what is known as the Red Green Alliance, is Islamo-communism, where they are co-belligerents for a while it's necessary to come in and destroy a culture's values, norms, mores, traditions, and they'll do that for as long as it takes to level the field. And then what they'll do is they'll bring in their planned solution. Yeah, I mean, that's how it's historically worked. But all that to say, they are making those moves, but the bigger thing that we have to think about is all of the propaganda that wants to tell you that what you're seeing happen is not actually what you're seeing happen. And we're here to tell you tonight that through reading the source documents and paying very close attention to the actual speeches that are being given, it is very clear that the Trump administration is moving away from this globalist rules-based international order and wanting to remain sovereign and wanting to uplift the system of liberty and freedom. So that is really, I would say, something to have a lot of hope in, and that anything that you think that you might know about what's coming down the track, I would just ask people to please try to step back and have an open mind and be open to the possibility that maybe things are actually happening that are shaking things up, because you've even heard from the Chatham House and some of the figures over there, making big sweeping statements about how the West is basically like the alliance with the West is fallen. Take it from there, Brad. I've gone on for much too long.
No, that's good. That's a good setup because we need people. We need to explain and help people understand. You want to ask the right question, right? This is what you want to. But by asking the right question, we mean this. There's a foundation for how we go about this, and I kind of left that point hanging. I'll come back to that in a second about the people who are writing, saying that the Board of Peace. Well, this looks just like the United Nations. We're going to come back to that point in a minute because it's not. It's fundamentally not. This national security strategy is America first. It is a true and good nationalism. It is fundamentally opposed to internationalism. And the point about this particular administration is that for the first time in 80 years, let's just say 50, okay, just to be safe there. The first time in 50 years, there is a president, there's an administration who is exerting America's sovereignty.
Right.
For the first time. Now, you might think that sounds odd, but you think back to the presidents all the way back to JFK and beyond. They were all committed to the liberal international order, the United Nations, being interdependent on other nations for economy. So this national security strategy is it's based on three things: to pursue and promote three things: prosperity, prestige, and peace. And again, I will make, as we go along tonight, I will make the biblical case. I will explain to you why I believe that the national security strategy, not all of it, and it's not a Christian document, nor is it written by Christians for Christians, but it represents the kind of leadership that is biblically justified. And the three big points in the national security strategy were prosperity, prestige, and peace. Prosperity, meaning to rebuild and strengthen the American people, particularly the middle class. Return the nation's wealth to the people. And to secure market access for the people. And that does mean, well, particularly within the nation, as someone mentioned, the Hamiltonian system, the American system, which was ultimately at the core of that, it means that we are self-sufficient. We produce our own goods. We can support ourselves by what we produce here. The liberal international order was different. It wanted everyone to be dependent on other nations. That's the purpose of the United Nations. Ultimately, to bring down the nation state. So
well, it ultimately is, imperialism. It's the empire, the Anglo-Dutch system. So they dump. They control the price of gold. They you have natural resources. It's the old empire imperial system that's just sort of rebranded and then also sort of tried to camouflage itself as if it's not there.
So the three big points in the national security strategy: prosperity, already covered that. Prestige. What does that mean? Well, prestige means that we need to project stability and power, but not just power for the sake of power, but goodness, power based in goodness to the world. We want to avoid signaling weakness. We want to avoid internal conflict as much as we can. So we need to, in that sense, in our own country, we need to. We need citizens to be law-abiding. We need the laws enforced, and that's something that the previous administration and the left today seems to be very selective about. So we need to avoid internal conflicts. This is one reason why the Homeland Security and ICE has been so active in rounding up illegal migrants. We want to avoid being indecisive, and we want to avoid pointless / forever wars. That is right there in the national security strategy. We're not interested in a global war on terror. We're not interested in constant wars. Now you might think, well, Trump's got us involved in all kinds of wars right now. We're not at war with anyone, first of all. And second of all, these are not wars. We happen to be, the United States of America happens to be the most powerful nation on the planet right now, with the most powerful military. And with that, biblically, there comes a responsibility with that kind of prosperity, that which is a blessing. So you have to be a good steward of that prosperity and that power. So when you see evil, objective evil in the world, and you're able to do something about it, you must. Now, the national security strategy states that we're really only interested in stabilizing our own region. This is why you saw the administration go into Venezuela and pick up Maduro and take him for a vacation to New York. And, so from a lot of libertarians and from a lot of those on the left, you'll hear criticisms of this as if it's the main thing that I keep hearing over and over, Summer, is I hear people saying, well, this is just more spreading democracy. This is more just like George Bush going into Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's not. When you look at the policy that's written down and then the actions that they follow through on, it is very different. Right? And this is the other point about the Board of Peace. Mm-hmm. Keep forgetting. The Board of Peace versus the United Nations. Now, there's a lot of people, not a lot, maybe not a lot, but a few that we've noticed lately. Summer was reading Carl Teichripp and called my attention, who is someone that we respect and we care about his work a lot, and it's excellent work. You should check out all of Carl Teichripp's work. But tell me, what was the statement that he made? Just summarize it. He said,
well, he just thought that, that this was, the impression was that, there's a lot of questions around this, and this looks like dubious and a new development of
looks
this.
a lot like the United Nations.
Right.
That's what he said.
Right. So having a very, the vibe was just like heavily suspicious.
Well, in one of the documents that they put on the screen during that Board of Peace meeting, during that official
the
business
presentation, the PDF that they presented,
you did see the term sustainable development used. Now let's talk about that for a second. You have to be very careful because words have meaning. And the United Nations has co-opted the word sustainable and development.
Yeah, you got the
word
17
green.
sustainable development
Right.
goals, which means
So why is it different? Why is the Board of Peace different? It's different for this reason. Now, the Board of Peace specifically was convened to deal with Gaza. And when you hear them discussing, and that's what they did at this particular meeting, what they're going to do in Gaza, they've got a 10-year plan. They're going to establish law enforcement, local government, and in 10 years, they want to turn it over to the people, the people who live there. So what it means when they say sustainable development in that context, they mean we want to establish something here that will be self-sufficient, that will be able to continue. We want to set up something here where people can work and support themselves. That was one of the main things they said. We want to create a situation here where people can lift themselves up through hard work. So that means, wiping out the Islamism. Doesn't mean removing all Muslims. It just means wiping out Islamism, which is the totalitarian political ideology of Islam. So this is one of the reasons that this is fundamentally why when they use the term sustainable, that's what they mean. They mean establishing something that will be self-sufficient. When the United Nations says sustainable development, they mean they want to sustain their position of power. That's what they mean on the inner circle. There's always messaging. When you put out messaging, there's the inward-facing messaging and the outward-facing messaging. So in sustainable development goals, the inward-facing messaging is we want to sustain our position of power. The outward-facing messaging is sustainable in the sense that we want to. It needs to be, climate activism. It needs to. We're going to save the earth. We need to make regulations for all corporations and anyone who does business so that they have to adhere to climate goals, carbon footprint goals, gender goals, stuff like this. So these are very different ideas of sustainability. So when you see that term in there, think clearly about it. Ask the right question. So in the National Security Strategy, we have prosperity and prestige. The other point about prestige was we want to reverse the contempt in the world. Now, for many years, the world has viewed America negatively. Global war on terror did a lot to help that perspective. So part of this national security strategy is to reverse that. We want to be respected by our allies. We want to be feared by our enemies. All right, prosperity and prestige. And the third one was peace. In the national security strategy, what they mean by peace is first and foremost, this is what I meant by this is a foreign policy with the American people as the priority. By peace, they mean safety, the safety of our nation, our borders, and the American people first. That's why we say it's truly America first. Also, under the heading of peace, would be the idea of stabilizing our region of the world. Not trying to spread democracy throughout the world. We just want to stabilize our region because that would keep the people in America safe. An example of that, Summer, is the narco trafficking and how much it's affected the American people for decades now. So part of the national security strategy deals directly with that. The fentanyl crisis, for example, coming across the southern border.
Yeah.
It could be China, it could be Iran, it could be anybody, because Venezuela was an international hub for narco trafficking, for spies from nations who are hostile to America. One of the things that they did in Venezuela, one of the things Maduro was doing was a spy or an agent or an operative, someone who wants to come in here and do violence. I don't want to say the words on YouTube because, when you...
Well, we're already suppressed,
when you do,
it doesn't really matter.
Particularly when you do violence to a president, that particular word. So what Venezuela would do is Maduro would allow these spies and these operatives and agents to come into his country, and then he would give them Venezuelan credentials because America didn't have any particular, up until recently, didn't have any particular restrictions on Venezuelans traveling into America. So they would get Venezuelan credentials and be able to travel right into, I'm not talking about people coming across the border illegally. I'm talking about just straightforward, legally traveling into the United States under false credentials. So that's one thing he was doing. And then the narco trafficking, which has killed, how many is it per year? 200,000?
Oh, well, to date, I believe it's over 300,000 at this point.
Per year at this point?
No, it's about 100,000 a year.
Oh, okay.
And that's just what they're tracking. So, I mean, it's probably a lot more. And this is really catastrophic. I mean, this is more than people died in the Vietnam War. Like, this is like 3 times as much or something. It's really staggering. I mean, if you think about it, because it's literally, it's just evidence that they're trying to erase the culture of America. They're flooding in, tens of millions, and then they're literally targeting Americans with these drugs, even in colleges and universities. And that what it looks, oh wow, it looks just like a Xanax. Oh, it looks just like a Adderall, but it's laced with something deadly. And
Yeah,
so,
we-
you're in college and you think, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to take this. It looks exactly like my Xanax. I'm going to take it, or I need to do Adderall. I need to pull an all-nighter. And then you never wake up the next morning.
And that happened. That particular scenario there has happened so many times.
Yeah, it has. And it destroys communities and families. And then also the phenomenon of the fact that cannabis-induced psychosis is a thing too. And that can either be acute, where somebody goes into like a crazy state and they murder somebody, or it can be over time, it can create schizophrenia. So these things are done to overwhelm the system. And think about the instability that creates in our communities and families, and the trauma of that, not just the people that are involved in it, but the family members around it. And very crippling. And then who are the people that carry on the traditions, mores, values of a culture? Well, none other than American people, like people that are born, that have been here for generations and generations, and they've literally just wiped out off the map, like hundreds of thousands of people.
The generation that would be coming up.
Right.
That's why
Yeah.
that strategy is effective.
Because they don't want those values and traditions to proliferate. They want to get rid of our values and traditions. It's about erasing Christendom.
And so how do you do that? Because, the United States is protected on both sides by vast oceans. It's very hard to invade the United States of America.
Well, not anymore, though.
With an army.
With the network.
with an army.
Right.
But the point you're making is it's
Canada and Mexico,
So the way they've done that then is through the southern border, but also the northern border coming through Canada. These enemies of America have been able to infiltrate that way and weakening the nation through fentanyl. And not only that. So this is one way that you stabilize the region, the peace part of the national security strategy. The other point, which we have to mention, is that this administration seems to be very much aware. They know who the enemy is, and they're very much aware of the rise of forms of communism, which is certainly what was going on in Venezuela ever since Hugo Chavez was in power there. They have sunk further and further into communism.
Well, that's the preferred method of the hidden hand and the empire, the globalist empire, which is, City of London, these people in positions of power and influence, primarily coming out of Europe, the European Union, and also Wall Street. The neocons, the rhinos, and certainly the democratic socialists. There's quite a few people in the club.
Yeah. So this is what that strategy talks about. It talks about stabilizing our region, stopping the trafficking of drugs across the border, shutting down the mass migration, illegal migration into the nation, and addressing communism in our region. Now, why would Trump be fooling with Iran today? Why would he be? Well, we have the ability to shut that down. And if it's true that regime is murdering their own citizens at a high rate, it's really impossible to know exactly what's going on in that regime.
Yeah, I
inside
believe
that
it's
nation.
really hard to know what's going on over there because, like, if you just look on social media and you look at all of the bots of people that, like, for example, on Donald Trump's Instagram account, it's like they're all like, you know, Donald Trump, save us, and we know that
Yeah.
City of London really, the European Union, they really want to take control of that region, so they would love nothing more than to install this king, right? Pahlavi.
Reza Pahlavi.
Yeah, Reza Pahlavi. They really want to put him in there so they can control the region because he's very much, he's at Davos giving speeches, he's touting the virtues of democracy, and when they say democracy, we've talked about this 100 times, they don't actually mean what we grew up thinking when we were younger, what democracy means. They've basically hijacked that word. It means consensus of the institutions instead of consensus of the people. It's basically when they're saying democracy, what they're alluding to ultimately is a version of socialism, which is Marxism. I mean, that when you hear that word, and when somebody is like, for example, Machado as well. Yeah, I've written an article about that. Why don't you read just a bit of that? That might be a good.
I've got it up there now. Yeah. Yeah. So the point here is this, folks. Just to wrap up the 3 points of the national security strategy, and then we'll get into that. I want to explain the core 5 also. Is this. Everyone's been expecting Trump to bomb Iran again. That's been the expectation now for several weeks. And he hasn't done it. And I think Trump has one of the best diplomats that we've ever had working for him. Steve Witkoff has done some really important things that you just never hear about because most of them are done. It's not most of that's done under. I don't want to say secrecy, but you don't want the whole world knowing what your chief diplomats are doing and what they're discussing with leaders of other nations because, of course, those who support the liberal and national order or the international rules-based order or what we call globalism today, those people would want to stop that. So this is how the Trump administration is securing the region. Prosperity, prestige, and peace. Just to summarize, prosperity keeps the American people first, bring production back to America. That was a big part of the liberal international order, which was to move manufacturing out to other areas of the world because it's cheaper. You can sell it cheaper. And ultimately it weakens our nation. Also, prestige. We want to change the way the world views the United States of America. And I think, whatever you think about Trump, in his bravado, he has shown great restraint in dealing with some of these more dangerous nations. And peace, just war theory, stabilize our region, prevent World War III, judge foreign commitments or get involved economically with other nations based on a risk-reward assessment, not because the United Nations says so. To keep ideological ambitions out of our economic deals. And just to wrap this part up, the Core 5 alliance that we talked about just a few minutes ago, right at the top of the show, this is something that is very interesting if it were to come to pass, and we do see evidence of it. The Core 5 alliance is an alliance between the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan. And you've seen this happen already. You've seen, in the news, you've heard of our diplomats and Rubio also. Rubio's been out on a tour ever since the Munich Security Conference, going all over the world and, talking to nations that we would like to work with. So the Core Five Alliance, United States, Russia, China, India, and Japan. Now, if that were to happen, there's also a few European nations that there are other nations involved in that, but those are the big five. This would utterly destroy that rules-based international order. It would force the European Union it would force them to deal with China or change their ways. They have moved far afield from their what they once believed in, which was, we'll say, democracy, freedom of speech, people being able to lift themselves up through hard work. They've moved away from that now. They're importing migrants into their nations now. Many of the great European cities have been destroyed. So, abandoning the rules-based international order and the ideologically compromised European Union. In 2018, the UK foreign policy strategy was written up, was determined by the House of Lords in the UK. And those policies, when you see that, this would be the equivalent of a foreign policy strategy or the national security strategy that the Trump administration released in 2025 or in November of last year. When you read that policy strategy from the UK that was released in 2018, it is fundamentally opposed to the policies of this 2025 United States national security strategy. Primarily, one of the things that they mentioned in their strategy was to oust Trump. And why? Because he is a threat to the rules-based international order or globalism. So that's the core five. So as you read the news, as you see the headlines, look for evidence of that. I encourage you to read. It's 33, 34 pages long. It's not much to read, the national security strategy. And then judge for yourself. You don't have to take our word for it. You can read it for yourself and see whether you agree with it or not.
Right. And one of the points to make, too, is that Vladimir Putin, when he read the national security strategy, he's actually quoted it several times saying, hey, the United States doesn't label us as an enemy. Mm-hmm. We're going to respond to that as such. So, he's mentioned that quite a few times as well. You've got Bronwyn Maddox from the Chatham House stating, we have had from President Trump what amounts to a revolution. He has dismissed international law in the interests of old allies. It is not grandiose to call this the end of the Western Alliance. This does mark the end of the Western Alliance. That is the Chatham House. That is the premier think tank coming out of the City of London and out of, the whole Fabian neo-Marxist movement that's trying to take over the whole world right now and force us into a totalitarian system. So they're very unhappy about how things are going. And you've got Canada's Mark Carney, coming straight out the gate, saying very inflammatory things like hopping on a plane, making deals with China.
The first thing he did was start making deals with China. And
right.
As you mentioned, the Chatham
EV
House.
cars, yeah.
The Chatham House, which is a think tank.
The premier think tank.
The first, when they were, what you're mentioning there, Bronwyn, what's her name?
Bronwyn Maddox.
One of the first things she mentioned when she gave her speech after Trump dropped the hammer on them at Davos was, we need to deal more with China.
Yeah. Yeah, and then also with Diego Garcia, which is out in the Indo-Pacific, It's like it's an island in the middle of nowhere in the Indian Ocean area, and it's been a place where the British and the Americans have a military base. And so, like, suddenly you've got Keir Starmer saying, "Hey, we're just going to like hand over basically Diego Garcia, this military base. We're going to hand it over to essentially what amounts to China." No big deal here because, why? Because we want to do the right thing, because we've got guilt about, the fact that we colonized this island. And the whole thing it falls apart because they want to hand it over to this island over to the left of where Diego Garcia is, that never actually owned the island to begin with. Like, they never actually were the owners of this particular property. And so to try to transfer it to them for the sake of like some indigenous virtue signaling, we're going to give it back to the islander people, and then we're going to like basically hand the keys to China. So it's like you saw that they were trying to pander to China like immediately. This is what you see from, and these are the people that are over there with the European Union that are pushing the Great Reset, the whole Davos crowd, the WEFers. Like that signals to me like a real desperation. Like, we're going to do, and then they've always touted the virtues of China, but China really is kind of the wild card right now because they've remained quite silent in all of this. But the thing is you can see that they were sort of scurrying and trying to use the leverage of, we'll give you this military base. We'll basically give you access to this military base, hand it over, with Diego Garcia. So there's a lot of things happening. And then so the full frontal of all of this is the propaganda, right? Now we're really in a war of how do we interpret the reality that's happening before us? And like we've said, like part of our messaging is just to say, again, like what I started out with at the beginning of the show is let's think about the fact that maybe we're in uncharted waters right now, like that things are not actually, you can't, just because you see things happening in Alberta with maybe the United States, that doesn't necessarily signal that we're going into the technocracy technate, the North American Union, in the sense that we've been pre-programmed to feel like that's okay. When you see these countries aligning, or when you see them becoming some sort of a conglomerate, or what's happening with Greenland, for example, that is actually strategic because we don't want Greenland to be accessible by Russia and China. So it's for national security, right? And clearly the Dutch Empire, they do not have the resources to protect it. So of course we want to secure that. Anyway, there's a lot of things happening. And if you just do the homework and you look at what everyone's saying, there's people that are upset. There's people that are upset with what the Trump administration is trying to do. And it's clear that the Trump administration, there are forces within the Trump administration that are trying to keep the nation state going, trying to keep national sovereignty going. And so that's quite exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's a real thing. And again, I would, for those who are suspicious, read the documents for yourself. Do your own homework with this.
Yeah, watch the speeches of these people. The people in the high positions that are, giving the directives on, oh crap, this isn't working, Like, we even saw one of our own representatives, a Democrat, what was her name? I can't remember, Raheen or something like this. And she goes,
Jean Shaheen.
Yeah. And she goes over and she's like, oh, don't, basically what she says in a nutshell is she gives this speech at a university in Amsterdam, I believe it was. And she was like, oh, don't worry about this. We'll basically like use lawfare to just, once Trump is out of here, it'll all be over and we'll be right back to, the rules-based order.
Now, again, that was the message in the House of Lords foreign policy strategy, or their from 2018. Now, that was during Trump's first term. Was we've got to get rid of this guy. And a couple weeks ago at the Munich Security Conference, you saw the several Democrats went there for some reason. For some reason, they felt like they were justified to go there. But their messaging there was very clear. Gavin Newsom gave it away when he said that you just have to, Trump's temporary. Mm-hmm. He's temporary. When he's gone, we'll be able to get back in the United Nations. We'll be able to get back to our globalist order. So that
and
you
Lord
you can read these
Palmerston,
things.
they're like invoking Lord Palmerston as well. With the fact that basically I'm going to butcher what it is. I'm trying to look for it right now in my notes, but just he was a historical figure that was very much representing an empire, and that sometimes we'd be co-belligerents with certain countries and sometimes we wouldn't be, and that's just how it goes. And so you had all these figures coming out of the British, camp coming forward and invoking that, Lord Palmerston. And Lord Palmerston famously stood particularly against the American system. So in other words, if you study history, it can be known that there are lines of thought that we've constantly been at odds between we wanted to seek and as Americans, we fled because we wanted to have, independence from imperialism, right? We wanted to have our own autonomy, but unfortunately, it doesn't appear that really that's been the case. Actually, we've been subverted for quite a while now, unbeknownst to us, but many people are now realizing
At least 50 years that our leaders have been committed to that. So, just sort of now, I noticed in the chat that someone was mentioning it wasn't Christian nationalism. What was it? It was a term. Someone in the chat says you're talking religious nationalism. Christ is my king, he says. Well, amen. Christ is king. So if we don't go too long with this topic, in a bit, we'll deal with a little bit of that. Explain to you, I give you a biblically based perspective, because we may have to do it in another show so that we can get into the detail, because CNN just released an article, or not an article,
another documentary hour.
Pamela Brown reporting for Anderson Cooper's show,
and it's real interesting
on this so-called Christian nationalism, which is just really a cover term, a dog whistle for white Christian nationalism. That's when they say Christian nationalism, they mean white people. They mean white Christians.
They mean like white supremacy and, racist and bigot and all of this kind of stuff. And it's quite funny how they don't go after like Roman Catholics, but they go after the Protestants. So they in particular name like Theobros, which are young Protestant men, and they target Doug Wilson routinely. And so I would just say, this is very convenient because, as we know, with the empire of the city, you've got traditionally it's Washington, D.C., City of London, and the Vatican. And we know that the Vatican wants to basically, act as the official umbrella for all of Christianity. I mean, we've seen them try to be more inclusive, right? Because recently the Pope came out and said, well, we're not going to worship Mary anymore in that way, like as far as venerating her and all of the Mary worship stuff. And so it is not a coincidence, guys, that the United States was founded on the Protestant faith. The system of law that we have is based on biblical morality and principles. It is not a coincidence that it is specifically the Protestant faith that is being demonized, because you want to alienate the native culture. This is the actual religion. When the country was started, it was 98% Protestant. 98% Protestant, a tiny little bit of deists, 2% Roman Catholic. 2% Roman Catholic. That's not Catholic. We did not start out as a Roman Catholic entity, if you will. We were a Protestant nation. But who do you see demonizing on a routine basis? The Protestants. On a routine basis. That's who they're targeting. And that is meant to bully us and intimidate us and try to keep us out of the public square. And it's also meant to displace us and to demoralize us. And so I would just say, please be aware of that, and also be aware, because when you'll hear different commentators talk about this, for example, Isabel Brown, she spoke a little bit to what Pamela Brown on CNN's interview was talking about, and the way that she describes it almost comes across as if, hey, it was it was us, the Christians, and it's like, I'm sorry, but no, you are Roman Catholic. That is a different system. We are sola scriptura. And I don't mean for that to offend anybody, but they are trying to appropriate Christianity. And we have to be very careful of that. That we've seen that with, and also the social gospel movement with liberation theology, with in the civil rights movement. We know that that's the social gospel. It's a Marxist version of the gospel that was ultimately infiltrated by Marxism, this version that, Martin Luther King has been a part of. So just to be aware, right? Be aware that there is a definite urge and just people just being not aware, right, of our roots and the history of this nation, wanting to appropriate it and to tell you that what happened didn't really happen. And so we're just here to say that that's not a coincidence. And, at the end of the day, God will work out his plan, and we trust in that. And we know that it will all be good in the end. But suffice it to say, when you're a watchman and you see these things happen, you have to call them out for what it is.
Yeah, well said. I've got up on the screen now. I was scrolling through some of our live shows over the past year, and particularly, I was looking for the show we did when we were responding to Courtney
Turner,
yeah, and Patrick Wood and Brandon House, because we talked about this in that quite a bit. So we have covered this.
Oh, we've
extensively. Here it is.
Extensively.
Yeah, there's that video. If you want to hear details about this, and you want to know if you. This is a good video. It's kind of long. It's over 2.5 hours, but this really clarifies our perspective on this. Also, our videos dealing with Charlie Kirk and his murder. Mm-hmm. We deal with this an awful lot.
To build on my point that I just made, you saw Candace Owings saying that before Charlie died, he was praying the rosary. That's the Roman Catholic Church trying to poach a martyr.
Right here.
Yeah,
poaching a martyr.
They were trying to appropriate him, say that he was converting to Roman Catholicism. That is absolutely not true.
Yeah, those are lies.
Those are lies.
And Candace Owens is someone who is she has somehow, I'm not sure exactly how, but she has become huge. And she's become huge.
Even your sister had heard about Candace Owings and was expressing sincere worry.
She was saying was that she had heard that she had heard that
his wife had taken him out.
The word was that his wife was the one who had him killed. That Erica was somehow involved in his death. Now
that is so evil.
I don't know those people, and I don't know exactly what's going on there, but we follow the evidence. And as from what we can see,
actually, the evidence of who really did that ties to the UN.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, you look at. That's a whole nother story, but
particularly in this show, let's see, we dealt with that where we showed the connection. Right here it is, the Mamdani connection to Charlie Kirk, which is specifically dealing with the United Nations, the state of Utah, the Mormon Church, and how all of that.
It's like a closed ring where they could keep everything on lockdown, and they opened a chapter that which was actually hostile to TPUSA.
Right.
And anyway, and we've got also on in our archive on Substack, we've got articles to go along with these videos. So.
Yeah, quite a bit of work on that this year. Let's see, we should probably, We can shift into that topic a little bit now, if you like. You want to do that now? Or,
Which topic?
well, Christian nation, the whole. Is America a Christian nation? You know,
Sure.
that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Okay, I'll play this video from a clip we made of Charlie Kirk, who really in 5 minutes gives a masterclass on the Christian origins of our nation. Now, many people will say, no, we're not a Christian nation. The way to explain that is, no, we're not founded as a nation with an official religion, an official church. But the founders, the world they lived in, the air they breathed, was fundamentally Christian. Their assumptions, when they use words like virtue, when they use words like God and nature's God, they mean Christianity. They don't mean Islam. They don't mean Buddhism. They meant Christianity. They were talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, yeah, listen to this.
Yesterday by a couple of my friends that our country was not founded on Christian principles. I want to see how an argument that you guys can give me to combat that.
Whoever said that doesn't really know what they're talking about. So first of all, remember that we were a collection of states and colonies, and you need to read the state constitutions before anything else. 9 out of 13 of the original states required you to be a Bible-believing Christian to serve in government at the time of the founding. Even in actually, 13 out of 13 required a declaration of faith. 9 out of 13 required you to be a Protestant, except Maryland, which was Catholic, which still required a declaration of faith. In almost every single one of the original state constitutions, Pennsylvania included, they had, I profess Lord and Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior in the original state constitutions. So you remember, we're a collection of states before that. Secondly, 55 out of 56 of the original signers of the Declaration were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians. You asked about common law. So common law is inherited from Blackstone, who was Christian. A common law is an outgrowth of the scriptures. So let's go to 3 principles of common law: presumption of innocence, due process, and jury of your peers. All 3 are biblical principles. So, and all wrapped into the ultimate biblical principle that you shall not favor justice if you are rich or poor, which is in Leviticus 19, right before the most famous part of Leviticus 19, which is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. But before that is that in the administration of justice, you shall not favor the rich or the poor, which is the idea of blind justice. We get that in the West, which is incorporated also in the New Testament ideal. Neither slave nor Greek nor Jew, you're all one in Jesus Christ.
Sorry about that. I didn't have the picture up there, but here you go. Now you can see what's happening. Sorry about that, guys. I had to fix an audio problem, which should be all good now.
The idea of human equality. These are all biblical ideas. They're not Enlightenment ideas, which is they kind of get conflated at the time. But more importantly than that, they say that God was only mentioned 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. Well, that's a big deal, okay? Laws of nature and nature's God. The last paragraph of the Declaration reads as a prayer. It says, we appeal to the supreme judge of the universe. Who's the judge of the universe? Jesus Christ, as it says in Revelation, that Jesus will judge the earth on his throne. So in the Declaration, they were praying to Christ our Lord as a prayer very specifically. Thirdly, as I said on stage yesterday, Deuteronomy was by far the most quoted book, religious or non-religious, in the time of the founding when they were putting together the Constitution, more than John Locke, more than Montesquieu, more than Blackstone. So the book of Deuteronomy, which talked about laws, customs, traditions, it was Moses' farewell address as he's about to say goodbye, say, hey, good luck in Canaan, guys. Here's how you should set up your form of government. But finally, and most importantly, let's look at actually what the founders said. John Adams famously said the Constitution was only written for a moral and religious people. It was wholly inadequate for the people of any other. The body politic of America was so Christian and was so Protestant that our form and structure of government was built for the people that believed in Christ our Lord. One of the reasons we're living through a constitutional crisis is that we no longer have a Christian nation, but we have a Christian form of government, and they're incompatible. So you cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population. So that's just a surface level belief. So then they'll go to the First Amendment, which has two parts of the First Amendment which get conflated. First of all, separation of church and state is not in the U.S. Constitution. That is a single letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1807 to the Danbury Baptist Convention in Massachusetts, assuring them that the government would not come after the church, okay, which is the opposite of what they would say. However, that was then resurrected by the Warren Court and the Burger Court in the 60s, where they said, hey, all of a sudden we're now going to make this as if it's the Constitution. It does say in the Constitution two things, which is the Establishment Clause and the Free Expression Clause. The Establishment Clause is that Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What they were most worried about was a Presbyterian or a Anglican or a Quaker type religion taking over the federal government. Instead, it was that there is not going to be a state-run religion or a state-run government. Did you know that one of the first acts of Congress was taxpayer-funded Bible printing and distribution? Did you know that there were church services held in the Supreme Court building as late as the Jackson presidency in the 1820s? But going back to this idea of separation of church and state, and again, I could riff on this ad nauseum because it's just so ridiculous, right? Is that it's not biblical because first, it's not biblical. It's not constitutional because you go a layer deeper. People that even say that, do you believe in separation of morality and state? Nobody does. So all laws are a reflection of morality, and all morality comes from somewhere. There is no such thing as neutral morality. And we believe what the founders believed because they put it in the halls of Congress, they put it in the Supreme Court, and they put it all throughout the country, which is that the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, is the core morality of how a society and a civilization should exist, right? The 10 Commandments of every person. And finally, and this is the kicker, if the founding fathers were not Bible-believing church-attending Christians, why did they put Leviticus on the Liberty Bell? Not John, not Psalms, not Proverbs, not Genesis, Leviticus. Most Americans can't spell Leviticus. Leviticus 25:19, proclaim liberty throughout the land of which you are in. It is one of the most sinister, most unsubstantiated lies that does not come up against any sort of academic scrutiny. This idea that the founding fathers were a bunch of Enlightenment common law deists. The reason they hate it is because the reason they must say this is that if we actually go back to our Christian roots and we go back to where we once were, it's America's best hope for revival and for a great future. You want to add to that, anything? Sorry.
So there you go. There's that. Now, one of the things that came up in there is this idea of separation of church and state. Now I'm going to jump into our show holder and oh no, I've already got that video up here. Here we go. Now, you will hear, this is the report by Pamela Brown at CNN. She also interviewed Doug Wilson last year. And this is part 2 in her series on Christian nationalism. And let's just preface all this, Summer, by saying what we know about the term, the weaponized phrase Christian nationalism. There are some people who are faithful and who we respect who don't mind using. They've taken the term Christian nationalism. They say they're Christian nationalists. They're not offended by the term. In fact, they're happy to fly that flag. We think the term is not helpful. We think we don't want to use the language of the enemy, and that is a term that has been created. Because here's the big point: there is no one definition when someone uses the term Christian nationalist or religious nationalism, like what was in the chat a few moments ago. You have to wonder, what do they mean by that? What is nationalism? What is a Christian? What are Christians called to do? How are we called to live? So, by the most common definition, the most common points when you hear them talk about this, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, look at the camera.
I'm talking to you. But by the most common elements of a definition of Christian nationalism, then the founders themselves were Christian nationalists, because what they mean when they say that is people who believe America was founded, or that America is a Christian nation. Now, what do you mean when you say a Christian nation? We don't have a state religion. We don't have an official state church. When the nation was founded, it was, give those percentages again. You were citing them to me earlier.
Yeah. America was founded as a moral and constitutional covenant rooted in God-given rights and ordered liberty, and that inheritance can survive only if it is consciously understood, defended, and passed on. In the 18th century, 98% of Americans of European descent were Protestant. Roughly 2% were Roman Catholic, and there were about 2,000 Jews living in just 4 American cities. Only a handful identified as deists. The black population was significant in early America as well. So we've got in the 18th century, blacks, people of African descent, were a significant portion of the colonial population, approaching 1/5 by the 1970s and nearly 19% by the first U.S. Census in 1790. So it should be also noted that Black Americans in the 18th century were Christian, overwhelmingly Protestant, and that biblical faith, rather than secular ideology, became the primary moral language through which injustice was confronted, conscience was formed, and appeals to liberty were made. And again, the Bible was cited more frequently than all European authors combined in the writings of the founding era.
Excellent. Great job. Now, what that means, this nation was founded, I guess I need to back up. When the founders of our nation were writing and debating the principles of what would become the United States of America, the world they lived in, the society that they established here was a Christian one.
Right. They just didn't designate that there was an official church, like a theocracy.
When I say it was a Christian society, though, I mean that there was no official church.
Right.
The official, the national religion, or the official church of the United States of America.
Yeah, they didn't want to have a Church of England, for example.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
that's why they had left, because there was an official nationalized denomination in England.
Because according to the Bible, you're not supposed to be imposing what you think on somebody else. You know, that's a biblical concept, that you would have freedom of conscience. That is grounded in the Holy Bible. You're not supposed to try to coerce somebody into believing something.
Right. So the point there is, in the documents, in the founding documents, or in the when you read the Federalist Papers, you read the debates that the founders had. When they mention words like virtue, and they say God and nature's God, and they are appealing to Christianity. So the United States, or America, was founded like this. These men were incredibly influenced by the Enlightenment. There's no question. This was called the Age of Reason. And they lived in a Christian society.
Yeah, we would call that the hegemony, just the water you breathe, the water you swim in and the air that you
cultural
breathe.
And societal assumptions.
It's the worldview. You're living in the worldview, the Christian worldview.
Exactly, yeah. So that doesn't mean that everyone was a faithful, saved, justified by grace through faith, grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. It doesn't mean that they were all true believers.
But you've got, like, James Madison, I have a quote. He says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. So James Madison's warning reflects the American covenant of ordered liberty, because men are fallen and freedom must be secured not by trust in human virtue or centralized power, but by constitutional order grounded in moral restraint, accountability, and God-given limits on both the people and the state. And you've got John Adams saying, we recognize no sovereign but God, and no king but Jesus. That's John Adams. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Now, we've, well, let me finish this point here. Okay, so the founding was like this. These men were influenced by Enlightenment thinkers, for sure. So that means that they were well aware of and in favor of and wanted to promote concepts like freedom of speech, individual agency. This, the idea of unalienable rights comes out of this kind of thinking. But when they established this country, they took those principles of agency and freedom of speech and just weights and measures in our courts and our justice system, and grounded it all in the moral law of God. This is why you see it mentioned so often in the Declaration of Independence. So America was founded on Enlightenment principles, grounded in and restrained by the moral law of God. And the reason they did that, and you see this in their writings, is because they understood very clearly that man is fallen, that every man is bent toward tyranny. It's the urge in everyone's heart when we get into positions of power. So they understood this, that evil was our predisposition. That's the predisposition of every human being in a fallen world. It's only by the grace of God that we don't do evil incessantly.
Yeah, John Adams, he also said, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That was in 1813. That was actually 1789.
I dealt with this particularly. I won't go into all the details because I want to point you to the video that we've done about this already, which we were responding to Days of Noah, who made a couple comments. Like he said, particularly that, and this Substack. All right, we have several Substack articles on this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
He said that Jesus wouldn't want you to be engaged in politics. And then he goes on to say that Jesus would want you to focus on your home and your community. And that's true, of course. The principles of charity start in your home. Your responsibility starts there and then works out to your neighbor, your community, your church, your state, and your nation. But as you'll see in that video, my case comes from the Bible. What did Jesus say about it? And so you look at his parable of the talents. You can check that video out from that. I've talked about that a lot. We've even put it in our articles.
I do want to make a point, though. One of the problems with particularly with, I really encourage people, if you haven't already, please go and check out Chad O. Jackson's work that he's done on Martin Luther King. This is really so important that people understand this, because it's once you look at the research that he's laid out and watch his video series on MLK, you'll see that Martin Luther King, he believed in social justice. Like this is not biblical justice. This is social justice. And we've also seen an infiltration, even with the upcoming Shepherds Conference. There's a lot of very concerned people because of who that lineup is. A lot of people who have capitulated with woke versions of Christianity. And this is really a problem, guys, because what's happened is, the people that want to subvert Christianity and want to remove God's morality out of our law and out of our, basically eradicate God, they really are intending to try to do this, the biblical God as is revealed in the Bible. the best way to do that is to infiltrate and to pretend that you've got the proper understanding, right? So they went into Black churches and they gave them a different gospel. It is a social gospel. It is a different gospel. And that's one of the reasons, too, that that is a Marxist concept. That is one of the ways that they're trying to rewrite the playbook when it comes to, resentment and all of the things, toxic empathy, all of it. I'm telling you, it's all connected. And so they infiltrated the Black church and convinced the Black church that social justice was the way to achieve justice, when it actually is in direct contradiction to biblical justice as was written in the Bible. And so, they're trying to, again, that's another way in which they've appropriated Christian language and they've appropriated Christianity is through that movement. And the fruits of that are obviously resentment and alienation from the culture that you're in. Chad O. Jackson does such an amazing job of really fleshing this out and helping people understand how big of a problem this is. And that's why you see also, when you see people talk about Christian nationalism being white supremacy, it's a direct, it's hand in glove, it's hand in hand with the notion that the Protestant faith, or that the Bible that is taught, is actually a white supremacist power structure that keeps everybody oppressed. So it's really clever how they've done this. They've basically said, they're speaking in Christianese, they're giving all the Bible verses, but they're reinterpreting what that actually means. And the conclusion of it is that we see society spinning out into resentment and envy and violence, because all of these things basically, if you look at Frantz Fanon, that's one of the big leaders, that violence has to occur in order to get to this next stage of justice, that people have to die. So it's violent. And it's worthy of just taking time and watching those episodes, and let us know what you think. Let us know if you think that we're lunatics. But I'm I'm telling you, it really connects a lot of dots, and it shows that the civil rights movement was actually, we already had the rights secured just by virtue of, that the founding fathers created our Constitution in such a way that people are already protected. Like the whole idea of civil rights, or the whole idea of, cognitive liberty or hate speech, like when they qualify these things and they change them, that's their opportunity to then try to secularize it. Right. And so I just want to read one more thing that I was really impressed by. It comes out of Cauldron Pool, which we encourage you guys to please check out. They're in Australia. I think it's a dual article written by Ben Davis and Matthew Littlefield, who we've had on before. Well, actually, it's titled with Ben Davis, this particular one. They did do a collaboration recently, but something that I just thought he nailed it as far as the description of also one of the criticisms that we get when we talk about these issues of being a Christian in the public square, and how that's automatically so off-putting to everybody. So just listen to this right here. The contrast made between secularism and theocracy fails to recognize the fact that every system is governed by a reigning theos. This includes secularism. This means that even secularism is a form of theocracy. To identify the God of the system, you need to locate that system's source of law and highest court of appeals. As Cornelius Van Til noted, as such, it is not whether we implement a theocracy, but which theocracy will be implemented, whether it is the false gods of secularism or King Jesus. The reigning theos will, by necessity, limit the liberties of all competing systems to some extent. This is unavoidable. Absolute freedom is only possible in a lawless society. So whether it is secularism or Christianity taking precedence, every alternative will be restrained at the point in which it conflicts with what the reigning system deems good for the wider society. So when we get criticized for saying, hey guys, let's go back to the foundation, we need a reformation, not a revolution. Let's follow what the founding fathers set out for us in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's because this order gives us the ability to continue society forward, where we're not saying we have a Church of England. We're saying we have inalienable rights. We're saying we have liberty of conscience. We're entitled to believe to choose the faith of our choosing. So it's not about enforcing a handmaiden's tale, but it's also being very sober-minded about the fact that for this myth of neutrality that people have about, keep your Christianity over there and don't bring it into the public square. Well, I'm sorry, but you're actually adhering to a form of religion too by saying, okay, we just want secularism. And the end result of secularism, if you really try to take it out, if you want to just say, okay, let's take God's morality totally out of the game. Well, that's exactly what the founding fathers warned about. If you take God out of our Constitution, if you rewrite that, you're going to fall into decay and tyranny, because you cannot, there is a moral reality that the creator of the universe has written into being. And if you want to ignore what he has set in motion and his law, I'm sorry, but it's going to end in the things that we're seeing now, with chaos and a withdrawal of grace and, all of these things, chaos will ensue.
Okay, let's, there we go. Let's look at the opening of this. This is the trailer for Pamela Brown's report on Christian nationalism, the second in the series that was just released. What's the Anderson Cooper show? Something with Anderson Cooper. CNN released it. It's not available. It's not. You have to subscribe.
It's the whole story with Anderson Cooper, but it's CNN's Pamela Brown reports the rise of Christian nationalism. And then it's also, it's worthy of noting that it's produced through CNN Originals, but also Warner Brothers Discovery, which just did a merger with Netflix. So it's basically the all-seeing eye.
Yeah, you have to. you have to subscribe to watch that on HBO or. Mm-hmm. Whatever.
But it's this huge conglomerate of power from the establishment,
Yeah, here we go.
As long as I have breath, I commit to you that I and we should never allow any group, no matter how large or small, to silence us from speaking the capital T truth. Christ is King. He died for our sins. We are forgiven.
That was part of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's speech to religious broadcasters last night. He also railed against what he called the godless left and praised Western Christian values. Hegseth is the most high-profile member of a church network that doesn't shy away from Christian nationalist ambitions, and education is a key part of its mission. Today, more and more schools in that network are teaching kids everything from a biblical perspective.
Can people leave, by the way? Caleb and EJ Ripple are the headmaster and headmistress at a classical Christian school in Texas.
Tell me why you think you're seeing this trend toward more parents sending their kids to classical Christian schools.
I think people are starting to evaluate what they're doing a little bit more, like to think more clearly. You only raise your kids once, so I think people are taking it seriously and making sure they're making the best decision.
What started in the 1990s with a handful of schools has become a fast-growing education sector. There are now nearly 500 schools across the country represented by the Association of Classical Christian Schools.
In these kinds of Christian schools, the curriculum isn't a normal curriculum like might be in public school with a Bible class added. That's not how it works. Everything is rooted in these kinds of Christian, biblically oriented kinds of curriculum. The Bible applies to every area of life.
What we are doing here is fundamentally different. What we are saying here is our mission as Christians is to make Christians, is to glorify God in our lives and through our lives, and to multiply the image of God.
So education is foundational for that.
Foundational is an understatement. Education is a transfer of a way of life.
The concept of classical education is really an enculturation. We want to enculturate Christian kids. Christianity is the best basis historically for civilization.
And in many classical Christian schools, that idea extends to the nation's origins, where students are taught that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. But while many of the founders were Christian, the claim that they intended to establish a Christian nation is widely rejected by historians.
When you look at the Constitution from the framers of this country, the only time religion is mentioned is to forbid religious tests for office holders and religious liberty. Right?
So there is a claim right off the bat. The only time that they mentioned it was to restrict it. That's the claim. So this is where the claim about separation of church and state will come from. I'll let this continue playing just for a bit, but we'll respond to this. We'll tell you why this is just wrong, not even close to being right. Summer's already told you what she has said up to this point has already been plenty to refute what Pamela Brown
They
has
basically
just
want to gaslight you and say, oh, this was never a Christian nation, telling the truth falsely, being right wrongly. I mean, the bottom line is we were never meant to be a theocracy. Nobody's arguing that we want to be a theocracy.
No true and believing Christian who reads his Bible and lives by it is seeking to create a theocracy right now.
No.
There will be a theocracy in the future when Christ returns.
When Christ returns.
And the thing you said a moment ago that stood out to me, that is really the foundation of any response to these things that you hear. You need to, if you're a Christian, you need to be able to respond to claims like this. If you're a Christian American, you need to be able to respond to stuff like this, because ultimately what this is, this whole pushback and narrative against Christian nationalism is really about taking down the nation. It's really about getting away from our foundation. It's getting away from Christ has no place in the public square. I'm going to play a clip for you in just a moment.
Specifically, the Protestant sola scriptura, Bible-believing version of Christianity is what is being targeted in all of Western civilization.
I'm going to play a clip for you in just a minute where a young man on a very successful and large YouTube channel was doing a video about Peter Thiel. And, you know, Peter Thiel has gone around
acting like a weirdo.
I've heard people say that he gives sermons. No, he doesn't give sermons. He gives lectures. But anyway, talking about the book of Revelation and the Antichrist and all of this. And so, but in that video, he makes a statement that shocked me, because he, as far as I can tell, is a professing Christian. He mentioned that he has a pastor. So Christians have pastors.
Well, there's, all kinds of strange pastors out there.
Right, but a professing Christian nonetheless. That would, and he said that, he was making this argument against separation of church and state, and he reads Thomas Jefferson's, the quote from Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist about separation of church and state, as if Jefferson was really saying that you should not express your religion in government. The government and the church are separate. But that has no, that doesn't mean that you can't be a Christian in government, that you can't express Christian values in government. Now, the point that you made a minute ago that I wanted to hang on to your point, but was this. You said something to the effect that everyone is religious.
Right.
Right? And this is something that Doug Wilson said in his interview with Pamela Brown.
Everyone has a Theo.
Right. Every government is a theocracy. The only question is, who is Theo? Who is their God? Who is Pamela Brown's God? All right, I'll play.
Right. And I did want to say to your point that Jefferson's 1802 letter that a lot of people will talk about as the wall of separation was about protecting religion from government control, not denying Christianity's influence on America's founding.
Yeah. That's the best way to summarize it. I've got a conclusion here on our way out that I'm going to make the biblical case and about separation of church and state. But let's hear a couple more minutes of this, and then I want to play that clip from the Volksgeist YouTube channel. It's a good channel. They do good work, but this is very interesting because it is a common perspective people take. But first, let's listen to a little more of Pamela Brown on her crusade against Christian nationalism.
Right? How can you argue that the framers of this country meant for this to be a theocracy, essentially, with a Christian education for all?
The claims.
I know.
What are you talking about?
That is telling the truth falsely
The
and
founders
being right wrongly. It's sophistry. It's casuistry. That is the art of deception when you're making argumentation.
She just said there that these people believe that the founders intended to create a theocracy.
That's not true.
There are people who think like that, but they are a very tiny sliver. They are on the fringes of the faith.
And of course, they're the people that they've probably placed out there to say those things, just so it can look like it is that. But again, the phrase Christian nationalism, it's a pejorative label. I mean, as it's been designed by the enemy, and they've done it through a long-term plan. I mean, it's now you're seeing it sort of come into the limelight, picking up traction. Who? To demonize the founders of the United States.
At the time our Constitution was written, it was an assumption that everyone in America was a Christian. So I don't find it surprising at all. In fact, I find it expected that the Constitution of the United States wouldn't have a bunch of direct statements about Jesus Christ in it because they all assumed.
Christianity is the framework in every lesson.
When students study science, it's rooted in a version of creationism that also dates to the 19th century. All of the way that they understand science is a theological approach to science. So science doesn't become a way to discover things about the world by experimentation. It becomes a form of worship.
Funny, huh? Funny, huh? You can't do science from a Christian perspective, she just said. Funny because the scientific method and all the science that everyone claims to follow today come from Christians.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, is they've actually violated our Constitution by having programs like social emotional learning in the school system because they are actually teaching a religion. They are actually indoctrinating kids into their worldview.
Yeah, the other point the other thing she said there, creationism. Well, again, everyone has an ultimate. Everyone has a worldview that has something at the top of it from which they take all of their ideas. All right. Creation is the Christian understanding of how the universe came into being, why this earth is here in the first place, and human life. Now, the God of creationism is Jesus Christ. So, who is the God? What is the God of macro evolution? You know, the idea, the religious belief that we spontaneously came to life.
The Big Bang.
From rocks.
Something came out of nothing.
That's religion. That's a religious belief. That is nothing more than a religious belief.
It is.
When it comes to science, we teach that this is God's world. So we don't hide from the theory of evolution, for example.
Right, so you'll teach them about evolution or Darwinism?
We'll teach it as a theory, yeah.
Yeah, we teach it as this is what some people believe, laughably.
What about issues like gender roles? How do you tackle that in classical Christian schools?
Well, we're definitely not third-wave feminists.
So for female students, what do you teach them about what they should do once they leave college?
Well, we are clear that motherhood is a blessing, and it's a calling, and it's a priority. If you're a mom, your affections need to be first for your family and for your children, and then for your career. A lot of women in our communities have very high-placed jobs, but they're side hustles.
But it's funny, they all call it side hustle. I noticed that. The women, they never say it's my career or job, and that's by design.
It is by design because it's that order. It's showing that order that my first priority is my family.
So what about the husband? The husband says he has a career or a job.
Well, that's the calling of the husband, is to provide.
And do you teach that the husband has authority over the wife?
That's biblical. So yes, we would teach that. In the Christian economy, in the biblical economy, authority is a very big thing. I think that when you're talking about the husband having authority over the wife, it sounds bad in our context, but it has been the Christian way for 2,000 years, and it has worked quite well.
So are these classical Christian schools a vehicle to create a more Christian world?
Yes, that's our purpose, is Christian civilization.
So what do you hope the graduates will go out and do in America?
Live faithfully, wherever they are.
So you would like to see them in positions of power, naturally.
We're glad when they get there.
And classical Christian schools already have some powerful advocates, like Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth.
First of all, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership, for your mentorship.
Goodwin and Hegseth co-authored a book about what they characterize as the decline of public schools.
There's no such thing as secular education.
So you don't believe there should be public school education?
No, I don't believe in public education.
Do you think public school should even exist?
No.
Do you agree?
I would agree, yeah.
And it shapes what they do and don't look for in their own teachers.
We believe that the accreditation kind of process, secular accreditation, kind of seeking approval to do this, we believe that that is actually one of the things that led to the degradation of education in America. So we don't actually value like some kind of a secular affirmation. What we value as a school, the criteria for our teachers are, you have to be a Christian, of course, you have to love God, and you have to demonstrate that faithfulness through your life, and then you have to be passionate about what it is that you are, going to teach.
Do you think it's a sin to send your child to a public school?
There would be examples that are inescapable when somebody's in the custody of the state. Some of these things are not even an option for parents, right? But if
that was a big point he just made.
Well, they're
when you're in the custody of the state. And loco parentis is what this means, is that this is the assumption of a public school, is that they are your guardians. Mm-hmm. They are your legal guardians when you're in their care.
We've talked ad nauseum about the phenomenon of UNESCO and the World Core curriculum and how they have been indoctrinating kids ultimately into a Marxist worldview. That is what the public education is doing. It is, I mean, you cannot deny it.
Yeah, it'd be a good point to mention here, too. They're talking about secular schools and secular...
As if they're not doing that to their kids, they're just upset because there's kids that don't want to be, their parents that don't want their children being indoctrinated into, a Marxist worldview. That's essentially...
So the way I would frame it would be secular. No. Let me back up. There is secularism, and there is secularity. Secularism is an ideology that has a god, the god of the secular world, and there's secularity. America was founded under secularity. In other words, there would be no official religion. You were free to worship.
Yeah, the Constitution prohibits establishing an official church.
That's secularity. Secularism is what you're hearing from Pamela Brown. Oh, I'm appalled at the idea, and she said she hasn't shown that she's appalled here so much, but she does. I mean, she is clearly appalled when she talks to Doug Wilson also, but she is a secular person who follows the God of secularism. So that's just a good point. Let me move on here before we run out of time.
If a parent is sending a kid to public school, to government school, because it's free and it's too much work to try and homeschool, or it'd be too much a change of our lifestyle to do a private school, I would say that's a sin. That's an abdication of responsibility.
In red states, Christianity is making its way into public education. Some Texas districts are adopting the Bluebonnet curriculum, which weaves scripture and Christian themes into everyday lessons. Oklahoma officials have pressed for Bibles in classrooms, and in other states, there are efforts to post the Ten Commandments in classrooms.
Do you agree with anything that's happening in some of these Republican states where they're putting Bibles in schools?
Yeah, I think they're trying to right the wrong. I think that most conservatives would say, we just as soon get rid of the whole public school system.
And so are you happy with what's happening at the Department of Education being dismantled?
Yes, I mean, moderately happy because I think it was not that consequential of a department to begin with. But this is, it's good.
For all intents and purposes, this is what you want to see. The
Yes.
dismantling of the Department of Education
Yes.
and ultimately getting rid of public schools.
Yes.
So this is
Which, by
that's
the
a good
way,
place to stop.
they're spending more money than they've ever spent, and kids can barely read and do math.
Yeah, and it won't disappear quickly because the funding for all of that was established years ago by laws, and you can't just you can stop the funding for it when this funding runs out, but
the systems of learning that they're doing with the kids actually impair their ability to learn, learn how to read, to learn how to reason. Like, that's factually proven.
So the point we would make here is, as someone who doesn't know better listens to that, they would be thinking, well, get rid of the public school system, then how could we possibly do that? And even people who are libertarians or conservatives that we've dealt with and written a lot about,
Christless conservatism, yeah.
who believe that you should not have the Ten Commandments in schools and all that. Those people who unknowingly argue for federal control of education. I'm losing my train of thought.
Well, it's the federal control. What we've seen very clearly, it's impairing our students' ability to think. Like, this is the first generation where the stats came back where the younger generation has lower test scores than the parents. Why? Because they've wanted, again, that's a whole nother story, but they've been dumbing down America and students around the world purposefully to make them helpless, to make them unable to think critically and to understand, what's actually happening to them, which is that they're trying to prepare them for the New World Order, for the Great Reset.
That's my point. That's the point I wanted to make here, is because before the founding, there were schools. There was no public education system for a long time. And the first schools in the colonies were established to teach kids from the scriptures and to teach them critical thinking so that they could identify evil, they could identify tyranny, so that they could keep the nation that they had inherited.
Yeah, that was the whole purpose of school when it first came online. When it first came on board, was to make sure that that people weren't infiltrating the government and trying to subvert it.
Yeah, and here's this quote. Here's Julian Huxley here, first Director General of UNESCO, which is the United Nations agency that would deal with education. World core curriculum, for example, said a scientific world humanism, a world government will be necessary for the next stage in human evolutionary progress. The major tasks of UNESCO is a restatement of morality that shall be in harmony with modern knowledge.
Right.
Now, this is dealing again with the...
One more quote, too, I want to add from,
all right.
from Glenn Sunshine in Slaying Leviathan. The New England colonies established public schools expressly to teach literacy so that citizens could challenge their legislators for the scriptural justification of the laws that they passed. Laws without scriptural warrant were to be repealed as violations of Christian liberty. So,
yeah, all right.
Again, that was just a direct quote there.
Yeah, that's a good way to ground what I was saying. That's where we first got that knowledge anyway. It was from Glenn Sunshine. So that's a good point. All right, so let's listen to, his name is D'Amico. Let me get his name right so we can, I'll tell you his name when we come out. Oh, here it is. Philip D'Amico is who we're going to listen to here, from the YouTube channel Volksgeist. So listen to this, and then when we come back, I will finish this up here with a biblical response to all of what we've just heard.
ask, what's left isn't a mysterious thinker. It's a man who's so terrified of losing control that he'd rather destroy the world than share it. And that's where Peter Thiel's story stops being personal and becomes universal, because Peter Thiel is a symptom of a society that worships money, power, and control above all else. And that's what brings us to the ultimate question. What happens when those instincts stop belonging to just one billionaire and start defining the entire direction of civilization? I think Peter Thiel and I do agree on one very important thing, that the world as we know it is changing drastically, and it's happening right before our eyes. The systems that prior generations took for granted are being pushed to the brink. Our institutions are crumbling, advertising and surveillance and fake culture wars fill our minds, public trust and belief in the government is at an all-time low, the economy our parents grew up with no longer seems to exist, and the future isn't coming fast enough to feel like we're going to make it out of this alive. It really does feel like the neoliberal, democratic political order has failed. We're not in a golden age of American history by any measurement, maybe except constructing AI data centers. Feels like innovation has been forgotten in favor of consumerism, while the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. But I think where Peter Thiel and I would disagree is the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state is one of the foundations of classical liberalism. This is one of the main tenets of political order that Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land want to get rid of. And maybe it's one that they don't often address, but this is one of the foundations of Western civilization as we know it right now. And whether you're religious or not, which I personally am, I don't think any of us...
I couldn't help it to stop there. He just said, did you just say neoliberalism is one of the foundations of Western civilization?
It's crazy.
Funny. Well, neoliberalism is neo. It means it's new.
I know. The ignorance is astounding.
Classical liberalism, yes, maybe.
This is the revisionist history that people have, like even at Berkeley, like they pump them full of actual lies about what's happened in our history. They've literally rewritten history.
Yeah, I'll play the rest of this clip, but what you want to pay attention to here is the worldview that he's speaking from. Because he makes a claim earlier on in the video to be a person of faith with a pastor that's roughly Christian. And then his comment about politics and Jesus here really kind of shocked me. So just pay attention to figure out what is this worldview he has, because it's not a Christian worldview, but he's a Christian. And that has been the goal. This is what Summer was explaining early on in the show. The goal is to remove the Christian worldview from the public square.
Specifically, the Protestant sola scriptura biblical worldview.
Right.
Or the people that believe that that is God's word.
And you could say, too, that, right, we're not arguing for a theocracy.
Right.
We're not arguing for a Christianized nation, although we would love to see that, and that's what we believe that the gospel can do. What we want, what we will settle for, is a Christian consensus.
Well, there's no doubt that Western civilization is undergirded by the Christian faith,
right,
and the biblical worldview, and that has given it the culture that it's had. Right. And so, what we're experiencing right now is this international rules-based order that wants to sever us from God's order and God's law. That is what this is all about. So where they can't do that, they have to demonize.
Exactly.
Ever want anyone with my beliefs or anyone else's to use those beliefs as the basis for our government. I don't care if it's my personal pastor or my priest or the Pope or Jesus himself. I would not want my spiritual leader to become my political leader. It's the perfect setup for abuse, bias, control, and manipulation. And when you open that door, every law, every policy, and every punishment becomes dangerous. It stops being about what's right, and it becomes about what's right for whoever is in power. And we know what happens after that. History is full of people who were silenced or worse in the name of divine authority. We lost hundreds of years of civilizational progress because of people wielding divine authority as a political weapon. And again, we've known this for centuries. Hundreds of years ago, people sailed across oceans and were imprisoned and even died to live in a world where the government wouldn't determine their religious freedom. In 1802, Thomas Jefferson wrote the letter to the Danbury Baptists, and he said, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and God, that he owes account to none for his faith or for his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." Let's read that again. He said, "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." For over 200 years now, we have stayed on that course of a separation between church and state as much as we can, and there have been a lot of benefits to living in a secular nation. I think what we're seeing right now makes it pretty clear that even if we remove church, that a lot of people still have the instinct, the desire to be drawn towards belief systems that mirror religion, even if it doesn't involve church in the traditional sense. For many people, that's a puritanical leftist politics. For other people, it's a reactionary desire to return to a bygone past that never existed to begin with. But my point being is that for some people, the all-encompassing God right now is just money, wealth, and capital. Today.
All right, so that's a lot there, and I'm gonna respond to everything he just said, which will wrap up our point. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, the gaslighting and the cognitive dissonance is absolutely astounding because, again, we have been pummeled with this woke ideology, which is a religion. Like, they are enforcing that on everybody. They have no tolerance from anybody that does not see the world in which they exist. Like, there's already an ideological takeover that's been happening progressively, particularly over the last, since 1994 in particular. And it's worldwide. And it's an indoctrination into Marxist frameworks of viewing reality. And so to sit there and say that is quite astounding, to just have this cognitive dissonance as if the school, the educational system isn't indoctrinating them into a worldview in religion.
That's a good point. All right, so what you heard him say there, particularly when he said whether you're religious or not, which I personally am. He said, "I don't think any of us ever want anyone with my beliefs or anyone else's to use those beliefs as the basis for our government." What's the assumption in that statement? The assumption in that statement is we need leaders who have no beliefs. So then what Summer is saying is absolutely right. There's a cognitive dissonance there. There's a fundamental misunderstanding about reality. Everyone has beliefs. Your government already has a system of beliefs on which it's founded. They believe that you can be neutral. And let me get to that point. He said, "I don't care if it's my personal pastor or my priest or the Pope or Jesus himself. I wouldn't want my spiritual leader to become my political leader." You already have that. You already have that. You are committed to your worldview. And he says, it's the perfect setup for abuse, bias, control, and manipulation. Now, it is clear, it is a fact, it is well known that people do abuse and control and manipulate in the name of religion. But that is not an argument against fundamental truth. It sounds cautious, it sounds libertarian, it sounds liberty-minded, but it rests on several assumptions that collapse under a very quick and easy examination. First of all, the assumption about government. What is government? Government is not a church. In our particular faith tradition, we are Christians, we would identify as Reformed Baptists, probably would be our closest affiliation. So we believe that there are sphere sovereignty. There are spheres of authority. The government is one of them. The state is another sphere, and the family is a sphere. Those spheres are not to encroach on one another. So you see, when you have that is the Christian perspective. The government isn't to tell the family what. It's not to tell parents how to raise their children unless they're breaking laws or abusing. Right? The government isn't to tell the church how to worship or what its liturgy should be unless they're breaking the laws, doing evil. And likewise, the church isn't to control the government. Individuals of faith go into government and express that worldview in the government, and that's why we want more Christians to be involved. So, government's not a church. Government's not a mechanism for salvation. Government is not a dispenser of spiritual authority. Biblically, government is an institution ordained by God for a limited purpose. Romans 13:4. He, the civil magistrate, the president, your mayor, law enforcement officer, he is God's servant for your good, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Romans 13:4. That means that government has the power of the sword. They can punish evil. That's biblical. Government exists to restrain evil, punish injustice, protect life and property, preserve civil order. That means government is inherently moral. You know, it makes judgments. You hear people say, well, you cannot legislate morality. You just can't do it. It's clearly the only thing. That's what law is there for, is to create restraints on human urges for evil. Government makes judgments about what is right and wrong, what counts as justice, what a human being is, and what protections persons deserve. So the claim that government should not be based on beliefs is utterly incoherent. He may as well have just babbled right there. It means nothing. He made no statement there. Every law reflects beliefs about morality and reality. The only question is, which beliefs? It's very important. So if it's not Christian convictions, then it'll be secular humanist convictions. If it's not transcendent moral law, the majority will, or it'll be elite preference. So what you're hearing from Philip is the belief that neutrality is ultimately good. But neutrality is a myth. No one is neutral when it comes to moral arguments. Law is always moral. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Philip's fear assumes that if Jesus were a political leader, coercion would follow. Right? That's what he said. It's because of religion that we have all of these evils in the world. But that misunderstands both Christ himself and the process of Christian discipleship. Jesus explicitly rejected coercive political power. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. He will return one day to rule in that position. Until that time, the civil magistrate or the government has been instituted by God to restrain evil. The nation state exists for that purpose. Jesus refused himself at that time, refused violent enforcement. He rebuked tyrannical ambition, Mark 10:42-45. Jesus didn't establish a state church, even though all of his followers wanted him to, or most of them did. To follow Jesus is not to seize power. Following Jesus is to obey the Great Commission. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them all I commanded you. Baptize them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. So Christ claims universal authority. All of this is his. But how does he advance his kingdom? Through proclamation, through persuasion, through speech, through the way we live our lives, through repentance, and through transformation of the heart. Not through forced conversion. That's Islam. And what does discipleship produce? Discipleship produces obedience to Christ's moral commands, loving one's neighbor. We have 3 duties as a Christian in the world. The first one is the greatest commandment. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. The second one is the cultural mandate. To take dominion over the earth, to mine it, to pull the nutrients out for food, to pull the precious metals out, to make things, to make bricks, to build, to make steel. This is good in God's eyes. And the third duty of every Christian is the Great Commission, which I just read to you. Go therefore, make disciples of all the nations. Make disciples of people in all the nations. How do you love your neighbor? It's not just being sentimental. And Christianity is a personal relationship with the Lord, but it is a public truth. Being a Christian has public implications. Protecting life is love. Punishing theft is love. Defending children is love. Restraining violence is love. When Christians participate in politics shaped by biblical moral principles, they're not imposing a theocracy. They're seeking justice rooted in a coherent moral vision. So, really, what you've heard from Pamela Brown and hear from Philip D'Amico, you'll hear it everywhere. This is a common position today, is a false dilemma. It's Christ versus liberty. That's what they believe. Philip D'Amico's statement implies if Jesus influences politics, abuse will certainly follow. But history shows the opposite, right? What history demonstrates is the opposite of the conclusion he gave. That if Christians or if religious people are allowed to express their religion in the public square, and particularly in government, there will be abuse and there will be all kinds of evil. History shows the opposite. Danger is equally real and often worse. The bloodiest regimes of modern history were explicitly secular. Revolutionary France, right? The French Revolution was a secular uprising. Marxist, Leninist states, secular uprisings. Maoist China, secular. And National Socialism or Nazism in Germany, secular. They didn't suffer from too much submission to Christ. They suffered from removing Christ from the public square. That's what you get. No moral restraint. When rulers answer to no authority higher than themselves, law becomes will. Right? The government becomes the God. The state becomes the God. By contrast, as Christians, our claim is that rulers are accountable to God. That belief historically undergirded concepts like limitations on power, limitations on authority, individual dignity, and of course, human rights, also a term which has been redefined. So what we're really talking about here is the lordship of Christ. He is Lord of, if you're a Christian, he is Lord of all areas of your life. There are no boundaries where Christ can't reach. Christ's lordship does not erase liberty. In fact, Summer, the point you've made in many of your articles on Substack is just that. Without Christianity, without a Christian consensus, there will be no liberty. So, sorry.
Yes, exactly.
So the point here is a Christian consensus wouldn't destroy democracy or the Constitution or liberty. In fact, liberty, Christianity is the ground and foundation of liberty, and the founders knew that.
Mm-hmm.
So he said there, I wouldn't even want Jesus to be my political leader. But consider the implications of a statement like that. It's also what Pamela Brown is implying in both of her interviews, both of her documentaries, we'll say, on Christian nationalism. Consider the implications of what they're saying, of what they're challenging. If Jesus is who Christians confess him to be, the sinless Son of God, then he is perfectly just, incapable of corruption, incapable of selfishness and tyranny. To reject that is not a defense of liberty. To reject that is a defense of human autonomy. Scripture describes this mindset in Luke 19:14. We do not want this man to reign over us. Spoken by the Jews, the specific Jews who crucified Christ. That's their perspective. That's what you just heard from these two examples. So the issue is not abuse of religion by sinful men. That is real and condemnable. The issue is whether perfect righteousness should have authority. Even if Christ must be excluded from public authority and principle, then the ultimate authority has to rest somewhere, and it will rest in man. So he is right in one respect. Everyone has an ultimate authority, and if that ultimate authority stops at the man or woman who is in power, then you will see evil for sure. And fallen man ruling autonomously has never produced neutral justice. Neutral justice is an oxymoron anyway. To affirm Christ's authority over nations doesn't mean that pastors will run Congress, or it doesn't mean forced conversion. It doesn't mean the Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm. Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, it doesn't mean theocracy. It doesn't mean state-imposed worship.
It doesn't mean lashings and whippings of women.
No. They say that to scare people, so that to try to convince people to keep Christ out of the public square. So really what we're talking about here ultimately are categories. Biblical categories distinguish church and state in their role, not in ultimate allegiance. Government restrains evil, the church proclaims salvation, and both exist under the lordship of Christ. The American founding reflected exactly this structure. They said there will be no national church, no religious test for office. There would be protection for free exercise of your religion. We're back to the First Amendment now, which Summer has already summarized. So I won't go into that in too much detail because the way you stated it was perfect, is good enough.
Well, I do want to add, while you're talking about that, the First Amendment protects conscience because rights come from God, not the state. Yet today, the same courts that call the Ten Commandments unconstitutional sanctify compulsory LGBTQ plus indoctrination. Not so much anymore, right, because of the Trump administration, but nonetheless, they sanctify compulsory LGBTQ indoctrination and UNESCO's social emotional learning frameworks, which smuggle in theosophical and Eastern mysticism into classrooms under the label of mental wellness. And again, this is a Fabian Marxian indoctrination that is based on secular humanism, which puts man at the helm, right? You know, it's and it's ironic because it claims to be humanistic, claims to be, you know, putting man in control, but what it ultimately does is puts humans as animals, and it takes away, ultimately the end result of it is again a neo-serf class. You're going to end up in a totalitarian system where we're all governed by social credit scores. If we go the route of the UN Charter and the international rules-based order, which is also known as globalism.
Yeah, it's a good point to point out here, the difference between the rules-based international order. What's the other option? The other option is the American system, which is founded under natural law, where unalienable rights come from the lawgiver. What do you have if they were to get their way? What would you have? Well, you already see it. Like for example, in Washington State, where they did pass the law where where they could keep children in these shelters without telling their parents that they're there.
Yeah.
Well, Trump mentioned this in his State of the Union address when they were when he said something to the effect of ripping children out of their parents' arms, and he was talking specifically about what was going on in Washington State where they had made that law. We talked about this. I look back on it. It was 3 years ago when we first covered that.
We did.
So, and it was funny because what happened was they were fact-checking Trump, and they wrote an article about it and said, no, Washington has no such law. Parents must be informed if the child arrives at the shelter, unless there is abuse, or if a girl wants an abortion, they don't have to tell the parents, or if the person has gender dysphoria or wants gender-affirming care, then they don't have to tell the parents that the child is at this shelter. Can you imagine? I mean, this is the toxic nature of equality, right? It's arbitrariness.
So, you know, the founding civil framework said the state has no authority to define doctrine, but modern technocracy, or under the Great Reset, now does exactly that through AI-driven compliance, ESG governance, reflexive law, and even things like the faith office. We've talked about, you know, the problems with the faith office because we've already got all of those rights enshrined in our Constitution. We don't need a faith office telling us what we're allowed to believe. Thank you very much.
That's right. And so the big point here then is, as the founders acknowledged widely, liberty requires religion. It requires a specific religion, one of virtue. The founders didn't create a godless state. They created a limited one. They created a state whose laws and prescriptions would be grounded in and restrained by the moral law of God. So the real question, right? We're asking the right question. If the people who make these arguments fear a nation or a world ruled by church, well, they fear manipulation in the name of divine authority, but the real question is unavoidable. If not Christ, then who is sovereign? Who is in control? Is it billionaires, bureaucrats, technocrats, ideological majorities? Someone's moral vision will define law. The Christian position is not coercive conversion. It is that rulers are not autonomous. They are accountable to God. That is what God has said. Government exists to restrain evil and to promote justice. So following Jesus for a Christian in America or anywhere else, but we're talking about America here in the context of Christian nationalism, following Jesus means proclaiming his gospel. Remember, we've got these 3 duties of every Christian: proclaiming his gospel, loving your neighbor, taking dominion over the earth, and living consistently within his moral law, acknowledging his universal authority. So, to exclude Christ from the public square, to say that you can't bring your religion into a public debate, when you exclude Christ as a category from political consideration, that is not neutrality. You are enthroning human autonomy. So that is exactly what happened in the French Revolution. They enthroned the goddess of reason as their god. So the choice is not between religion and no religion in politics. The choice is between moral authority grounded in transcendent righteousness or moral authority grounded in shifting human will.
Right, and to consistently tell Christians that they're not allowed to bring their Christianity into the public square, or that when we do, that's some form of white supremacy or bigotedness or authoritarianism. Honestly, that is discrimination. You are being intolerant. You're supposed to be the party of tolerance. It's a form of bullying and intimidation to alienate the native population that formed that country and that civilization. This is a tactic. It is a psychological warfare tactic. So they are being intolerant. They are being, this is a form of discrimination. It's a form of bullying. And it's a form of being demoralizing. And so,
So think about what you just said there is really interesting, because the left is supposed to be the party, or they're supposed to be the people of tolerance.
Right.
And at the same time, they say you can't legislate morality. But to argue for tolerance is a moral argument every time.
Well, yeah, and we've talked about Herbert Marcuse's repressive tolerance and liberating tolerance. So anything that's conservative, they repress. That's their liberation, So it's so easy to just tear their whole worldview down. Like, it just completely falls apart.
Yeah. All right, so I'll finish it up with what is our confession in the public square? What is the Christian confession? What is our message to people in the world? It's this: the king who rules is the king who was crucified. If such a king as Jesus is unfit to govern, no one is. What that means, if you strive for neutrality, if you go with this argument, you're going to end up in corruption and chaos. There is no liberty apart from a system that's grounded in and restrained by the moral law of God. Our founders knew that, and they enshrined it in the Constitution. And we all have inherited this covenant of American liberty. And because it's a covenant, it means it's a promise if you can keep it. It means there's something required of us. It means we have to be engaged and involved. We have to be busy about it. We have to be busy about our Father's work. All right. That's 2.5 hours. That's good enough, you think?
Yeah.
Successful. We have a new setup in our studio. It's good to be back in the studio after a little respite or a little break from it.
I did want to summarize for anybody that's sticking around to the very end. Thank you so much for that, by the way. We really appreciate it. It's a big block of time, and we very much appreciate you. I just wanted to say that the phrase Christian nationalism, okay, we've talked a lot about it, that it's a pejorative label. We believe it was created by the establishment, by the enemy, as a rhetorical bad smell used to marginalize Bible-believing Christians and pressure us into retreat from public life. Everyone brings their beliefs and moral framework into the public square, whether secular, progressive, or religious. Yet when Christians do the same, it is portrayed as dangerous or illegitimate. And we reject that double standard. America was not founded as a theocracy, but its founding principles were undeniably shaped by the Christian natural law ideas, rights endowed by a creator, moral law preceding government, and liberty ordered in truth rather than administrative power. To acknowledge those roots is not extremism. Right? It is historical honesty, moral law preceding government, and liberty ordered in truth rather than.
Okay, there you go.
That's all right. So anyway, I'll just read the last line again. To acknowledge those roots I'll just back it up for a second because that was a little bit distracting, right?
Yeah, that was you talking 20 seconds ago.
I know, that was like me. I know. I did recognize it. So America was not founded as a theocracy, but its founding principles were undeniably shaped by Christian natural law ideas, rights endowed by a creator, moral law preceding government, and liberty ordered by truth rather than administrative power. To acknowledge those roots is not extremism. It is historical honesty and the rightful participation of Christians as equal citizens in civic life. Okay, so just making that statement abundantly clear, and also to come full circle to say that the Trump administration, through the actions that they've been taking for quite a while now, at least several months, for sure, if not, obviously from the inception of his new term here. They're taking a stand against a whole of society censorship framework that's masquerading as democracy. And it's taking a stand for the return of consent of the governed, okay? So we the people. And the fault line that we're dealing with right now, just to be really, really clear, the real fault line, two rival orders and worldviews are colliding. The international rules-based order, which you could put in with Democrats, democratic socialists, Marxists, neocons, rhinos. These are the cheerleaders of this system. Even, the Red Green Alliance, Islamo-communism. They are in cahoots, working toward the Great Reset, working toward the Davos agenda. This is authority derived from institutions, not the people. This is law shaped by consensus, which basically means collectivism. This is communism. This is, whether it's communist or fascist, same thing. It's both a leftist project. Rights granted administratively, stability prioritized over truth. So they want to just chuck truth out the window for the sake of the order that they want to force, peace without righteousness, and the ruling ethos of it, or the charge, their fundamental worldview is anchored in the United Nations Charter, superseding nation-state sovereignty, and that means all constitutions around the world. That's what it was designed to do. And versus, so here's the other worldview, is natural law order, and that is what the Trump administration is currently working toward heading back in the direction of with the American system, the Hamiltonian system. And that is authority derived from God, law precedes government, rights are endowed, not issued, power is restrained, peace as the fruit of justice, working toward the U.S. Constitution as it was written by our founding fathers, national sovereignty and unalienable rights. And so as the upcoming elections approach, voters should understand that the Trump administration is pursuing a decisive departure from the international rules-based order, globalism, neo-Marxist ideology, and centralized technocratic control.
It's a great summary. I think the only thing to say to ground that would be that all of these arguments, everyone has a worldview, and all of these people are expressing their worldview. There we go. And so the question we have to ask then is, what is their worldview? Why do they believe what they believe? And when they make arguments for justice, they believe something ought to be done a particular way, we ask them. You should ask anyone who makes a moral argument or a moral claim, by what standard?
By what standard?
What is your standard? Why do you believe that it is right that we do this? Why do you believe that it's right and just that Christians should not honor Christ as king in government? You saw Pete Hegseth invited Doug Wilson to the Pentagon to have a worship service. Separation of church and state, you violated it. No, they did not. Unless you believe that the founders who created
that wasn't like a
the
mandatory thing. That was voluntary. That was them doing that on a Sunday.
Unless you believe that the founders who created the concept of separation of church and state violated it, because they prayed in government buildings, they prayed in the House chambers, still do. Every session of Congress is opened up with a prayer. Is that violating the First Amendment? So you have to understand that when people use that argument, they try to make a First Amendment claim against having a religious service at a government building, as James Lindsay did on Twitter recently. They have fundamentally misunderstood the First Amendment. And as Summer said, the worship service at the Pentagon was on a Sunday. No one was required to be there. No one was coerced. They were invited. No, and even the chaplain, even the military chaplain who happened to be there, it was Sunday. He was off the clock.
Freedom of religion.
His working hours are
Somebody
standard.
in the chat goes, 109 countries, 0 were Protestant. Anyway, they're just trying to,
What does that mean? What's the point?
Well, because we've been stating that the United States is founded on Protestant.
I don't know, 109 countries.
109 countries, 0 were Protestant, is what this person has said in the chat.
0 were Protestant?
Mm-hmm.
Why 109? Interesting. I see it there. I just can't see it well enough. 0 were Protestant. Well, we could take that one way or the other. What kind of world do we have? Do we have a just world?
Have you heard of the Protestant work ethic?
Seems like we could do better to have more.
The Protestant work ethic has influenced.
I'm not sure whether that's a negative comment or not. It could be.
I'm just
saying that look at the state of the world.
But the reality is that, again, America was founded on the biblical worldview. Our system of laws comes from the biblical worldview.
There's no way around it. You might not.
98% were Protestant Christians.
And if you're not, it was their heritage, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not arguing for a theocracy. We're not arguing that the government should be Christianized. We'd like to see that. No, what we would settle for would be a Christian consensus. What we would settle for is a time when Christianity was favored. We're in an age now where Christianity is deplored. It's seen as deplorable to people. There was a period in the West where Christianity was favored, and then it became kind of neutral either way, take it or leave it. But now where you can see very clearly from this report and then from the statements from, a successful YouTuber who has a lot of people listening to him, we can see that people have taken the bait and they believe that the right thing, that you can be free, that liberty can be had without Jesus.
Right. And I just want to say this one paragraph that I wrote in response to somebody, questioning these issues this week, in fact. And what I said was Jefferson's 1802 letter about a wall of separation was about protecting religion from government control, not denying Christianity's influence on America's founding. One private letter does not override the Declaration's appeal to a creator, the Christian natural law tradition shaping early law, or the founders' widespread belief that liberty depends on moral virtue. The Constitution prohibits establishing an official church. It does not declare the nation secular or morally neutral, okay? America was not founded as a theocracy, but it was undeniably founded as a Christian civilization operating under natural law assumptions. Rights come from God. Law restrains power because man is fallen. Liberty requires virtue. Government exists under moral authority, not above it. This distinction, Christian moral foundation without ecclesiastical rule, is precisely what separated the American experiment from both European state churches and modern technocratic governance. Western legal order, individual dignity, the human rights arose from Christianity's view of mankind as made in the image of God, and social trust and self-government depended on shared moral commitments rooted in Protestant Christianity.
Yeah, from a Christian worldview, Christ's lordship is not a weekend hobby. It's a public truth. It's reality. And the gospel announces this truth.
It's a moral reality. The moral reality that the West has been living in comes from, it is undergirded by the biblical worldview. That's also, let me just say, this is why in the eyes of Marxism and radical Islam, they view both Jews and Christians equally as enemy number one. Why is that? Because they both share the Bible. We both, they have the Old Testament. We have a biblical worldview. It comes down to the biblical worldview as enemy number one. So that's the one that the Marxists and the globalists and the radical Islam wants to destroy Christians and Jews.
Yeah, ultimately the world belongs to the one who made it. And those who have authority and are rulers in this world are accountable to its creator. Even when they deny him, they're still accountable to him. That's the nature of truth.
That's right.
So it's not a question of whether ultimate commitments enter the public square or public reasoning. The question is whether we will speak truthfully about them, and whether government will respect conscience by refusing coercion or not. And Christianity ultimately rejects coercion.
Yeah, it rejects coercion.
So in that sense, the First Amendment, properly understood, doesn't threaten the public square. It doesn't threaten government. It doesn't threaten democracy or the Constitution. It's one of the chief legal protections that allows a Christian public witness.
Right. And that actually reminds me of an article that I wrote recently about coexist. That coexist was actually a huge scam, because that never meant tolerance for everyone. That was actually a reverse psychological operation to infiltrate and then to be over there going basically like, yeah, everybody's version, but what they say is not acceptable. That's not acceptable. So it's actually intolerant, and it's a way to subvert the host country's founding beliefs. I mean, that's what the whole coexistence movement is about. It's not tolerant at all. So, anyway, okay, let's wrap it up. We've gone really way too long. It just kind of happened. A lot to say.
Let me remind you all, please like this video or dislike it. That's fine too.
Yeah, you can dislike it. That's cool.
That's fine. Just click one of them. But also, if you appreciate this work, share this video, leave a comment. Leave us a comment, and all these things help the channel out, and anything you can do to help us, because our channel is really, really squashed. It's hard for us to...
Shout out to Dilly Gill and Joseph Powell.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
Crystal.
Crystal was, she's been here tonight too. And I can't read the names, but you folks who are here with us and offering some comments.
Yeah, thank you for your comments.
Positive or negative, both. We appreciate you being here. We're one of the things that we're always adamant about is the fact that we are happy to hear your objections. In fact, when we made the video about Days of Noah and other people who make claims about what Jesus would or wouldn't do, or he also mentioned in
we
one
offered
video
to have
that,
Courtney Turner on. We said we'd have Days on to talk about it. And
right, he made that claim that God isn't interested in nations. You can't support that from the Bible. That's got to be a personal belief. Yeah, so one of the things we did then, and we'll extend it again here now, to Days, to Courtney Turner, to Patrick Wood and Brandon House, whoever else out there who disagrees with what we're saying or thinks we're wrong, we are happy to hear from you. And I am willing to debate publicly any of you, anyone who wants to take up one of these issues. Would Jesus want us to be involved in politics? Is it a Christian nation?
Or that any expression of Christianity in the public square is false light and churchianity, and that God can't bless that. You know that Vodi Bakum, the great Vodi Bakum, who just passed away, right? His last sermon, or not sermon, his last talk that he had with Lennox Califungua was about be careful how you speak about Christ's bride.
The church.
The church.
The people of the church.
Right. So God is doing something. Even at Charlie Kirk's funeral, God was doing something there. And you cannot come up and say that that whole thing was evil or like it's the false light. I mean, you just can't do that. That's very fear and trembling, you know?
Yeah. America was never a Christian nation is one of the topics. Another one of the topics was America was never good.
Well, it was occult magic and it was
America,
Masonic.
America was founded on Masonic occult magic, and the founders.
And it's a corporation.
Or the founders were white supremacists. I'd be happy to debate anyone who wants to take it on any of these topics.
Like the reason why they say that it was founded on white supremacists is because social justice, liberation theology teaches that the white man was oppressive with his version of the Bible. So it all there's a consistent worldview there. It's not just like random things that people believe. It's actually an admission to adhering to a Marxist worldview. To adopt that notion that it was founded on like white supremacists. That is very much a notion of Marxist ideology. So
grievance. It's grievance as a virtue. So the thing we'd like to leave you with here as you listen to other podcasts, YouTubers, people, bloggers, Substack, or wherever you consume content on the internet, be very careful. Be very careful, because there are a lot of people out there who are happy to tell you what you want to hear. That's why we all live in our little silos now. That's why tribalism is the way of the day. Always ask. There are 3 questions that you want to ask. First, when someone is speaking, giving their perspective, and what is the fruit of this wisdom? This is a biblical way to go about it. What is the fruit of this wisdom? In other words, what does what they're saying produce? Does it produce, when these people are speaking, does it produce in me fear of man? Does it produce anxiety about the world? Does it make me feel like I want to disengage? Second question, what problem are they trying to solve? It's very important to understand what problem are they trying to solve. A lot of people today, the only problem they're trying to solve is to keep their numbers up, right? It's very important, because that's how you remain successful online is to have big numbers. So it's very curious as to why we're still here. Yes, we have very low numbers.
Yeah. Well, and the other,
But-
again, the whole thing too is like, is if they can get you to be so jaded that you think just we have to burn everything down.
Yeah.
That's deconstruction, and that's what the Great Reset is ultimately all about. Is trying to get rid of the old order. And so that is that's very honestly, that's like a lie from the pit of hell. All we need
So-
to do is repent and return and reform.
For example, what you heard earlier from Philip when he was talking about Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, it was he was reading that as if it was the statement, as if it meant we shouldn't have anyone expressing their religion publicly or in office or in the government. Well, as you've already pointed out, the fallacy there. But
Anyway,
what problem is he trying to solve? The problem he's trying to solve is to keep Christians out of the public square. And there is no liberty without that foundation.
And also that there has to be a new way. Like we can't return to the foundations. Like, you know what I mean? Like that we've got to do a new system
Well, and
because everything's evil.
Right. And the third question, what's the fruit of this wisdom? What problem they're trying to solve? And the third question you should always ask everyone who's making their claim in the public square, by what standard? What is your foundation of truth? Why do you believe what you believe, and why are you saying this? Thank you for joining us tonight, my friends. Please, if you would, download the Armor of Truth mobile app. That's what you need. It's 100% free. It will never cost you anything, and you will get a lot. I don't know what to do with that, though. We don't. We have these beanies to give away.
It's an Armor of Truth black beanie hat.
Down here in the South, we call them toboggans, but so
Toboggan.
we have several
I've
of
never
these
called it
to give away. If
you want to,
if you'd like to donate to us, we'd be happy to send you one of those. Did we decide?
I think it's like $50 or more.
Okay, so
Yeah.
$50 donation more. We'll be happy to send you one of these until we run out. If you'd like to support us, though, any amount is helpful. But download the Armor of Truth mobile app. You're going to get live notifications and direct link whenever and wherever we go live. You get exclusive content on the app. You get access to our Substack articles on the app as well. And you also, there are videos, and there are some videos there. The Tracking Dystopia podcast is over there. And also we have audio Bible study podcasts over there. We have 4 teachings from the book of James, the first chapter and a half of James.
And we've got our brother from Down Under, Rob, reading the Bible. He does a great job.
Yeah, we have 3 videos from him reading whole books of the Bible. And there's also, you get several Bible translations that you can read on our app and an audio Bible, so you can listen to it there as well. Now, if you can support Armor of Truth financially, every donation of any amount makes a difference. And we have no sponsors. We are here because of the generous donations of others. You can use the Armor of Truth mobile app Give tab to donate to us, or you can visit our website, which is armoroftruth.net. That'll take you to our Substack. You can donate there, or you can follow the links in the description under this video. They're all there. There are several ways that you can donate to us. You can set up a recurring monthly donation to help us plan for the future. So, what are you waiting for? Go download the Armor of Truth mobile app now. So for those of you who may be new here, my name is Brad, and I've been joined by my talented and lovely wife, Summer. Together, we're Armor of Truth, and we're seeking a worldview revolution through God's revelation.
Faith is resistance.
All right, my friends, we will see you soon.
Thank you. Good night.
Armor of Truth. Faith is resistance.